TMMi America chapters webinar. I'm privileged enough to welcome you all, and today we have got one of the best speaker what we do, and Rex Black, our president of TMMi America chapter, is going to present on TMMi and DevOps. Next slide, Rex. So before we go into this webinar, there are a couple of things we wanted to tell you about what TMMi America chapter is, and then membership. Then afterwards, we'll delve into the webinar now. Next slide, Rex. Okay, here is the agenda. We are going to talk about what are the TMMi level 4 and 5, the different process areas and the improvements, test process improvements through with DevOps. And then we have got a couple of webinars lined up for the next coming days, and those things we are going to announce it to you. So next slide, Rex. Thank you. Okay, so TMMi America. So we are a young team. I mean, we just started in 2020. It's a local chapter of TMMi Foundations, and then we provide a local relationship to the TMMi Foundation in United States. And our mission is mainly to support organizations to improve their software and system testing and achieve higher and sustainable levels of product quality for systems which they are developing and maintaining through TMMi. So with that, there are a couple of like-minded people who are practicing TMMi in USA came together and started this chapter. And it's just a start. So we are looking for more from the people who are interested in TMMi to be part of this group. That's where we have started our membership, where we'll be looking more from you. Rex, the next slide. And what we have offered is we have got two things. One is the basic membership, where it will be valid for 1 year, and then you will have access to our TMMi newsletter, which will be circulated, and that is free. And also, if there are people who are passionate, who want to join with us and volunteer with us more, and that's where we have got the premium membership. The premium membership costs $25 per year, and it has got its own perk, where as a premium member, you'll have access to our newsletter and our community, and then you will also have access to our webinars. Like usually what we do is 30 minutes after the webinars, we'll have a discussion with our board members. You can talk with us, you can discuss, and then if you have any questions, you can bring it to us there, and that will be more of an interactive session. And one other important thing is you will be able to run for the chapter board after you're a premier member for 2 years. That's where we would like give this opportunity for many of you who are interested to be part of TMMi America board, and then volunteer with us and help TMMi to be more prevalent in United States. And if you are interested to become premium member today, you can send email to info@tmmamerica.org, and then you'll get an access to the 30 minutes discussion after the webinar. Next slide. And now, without much delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. And our speaker for today is Rex Black. And as you all know, he was the founder and president of TMMi America chapter. And he was also the founder and past president of ISTQB and ASTQB. He is one of the prolific author who has been practicing software testing, and I have read his book, multiple books, and I'm really proud, like, and I'm introducing him. And one important thing, if you had followed social media, just recently, 5 of Rex Black's books, including Agile Testing Foundations, made it on the Book Authority's top 100 software testing books of all time. Rex has got, he's also the president of RBCS, and he has worked with multiple clients for small startups and Fortune 20 global enterprise. And he's a testing leader providing consulting, training, and expert services. Next. And without much ado, I'd like to welcome Rex Black, who is going to be speaking on TMMi and DevOps, how to perform test improvements for DevOps leveraging TMMi.
Cool.
Rex, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh. Appreciate the kind words and the introduction there. And it's great to make the top 100 list. Hopefully most of the people who read the books and put them on the top 100 list actually paid for them rather than downloading pirated copies off the internet. But, these things happen. Today we'll talk about TMMi and DevOps. These things are seen as, I wouldn't necessarily say contradictory, but not necessarily aligned, sort of orthogonal to each other, I guess you'd say. Like, well, why would I bother to do TMMi because I'm doing DevOps? Well, that's based on some misunderstandings and people getting kind of lost in some details. Well, a lot of people think about TMMi and kind of process improvement in general. A lot of times they're sort of thinking about just getting the basics in place. And that's true for TMMi. Levels 2 and 3, pretty much about just testing best practices and making sure that people are doing the things that, we all should be doing. Everybody should be doing risk-based testing. You shouldn't just be testing functionality. You should be testing non-functional aspects of the system like performance and security. You shouldn't just be doing dynamic testing, but you should also be doing reviews, those sort of things. So yeah, we all know that. And this stuff is applicable in any situation, DevOps or not, right? So I think people get kind of stuck at thinking, oh, well, TMMi, levels 2 and 3, basic testing best practices. What does that have to do with DevOps? Well, here's where that comes in. When you move beyond levels 2 and 3 and you get into levels 4 and 5, basically everything that's going on there, the objective is find defects early when they exist, or better yet, prevent them. Now, this should start to sound familiar at this point because this is early defect detection. That's shift left. You all have heard shift left over and over and over again. You saw my slide, the title slide that showed the shift left picture, right? And then there's also the shift down. There's the defect prevention, right? Shift left meaning find the defects earlier. Shift down meaning find fewer defects by introducing fewer defects to begin with. And when you get into DevOps, guess what? Shift left, shift down, right? So let's take a look at the synergies here because there are quite a few if you know where to look. First off, I mean, what do we, when we're talking about DevOps, like, okay, well, what do we mean by that? What's, because it's usually, it's a mix of stuff. And so what you'll find in organizations, at least this is what I found with clients that are doing something that they call DevOps. It's a lot like clients that are doing things that they call Agile. It's like, well, yeah, which one and how are you actually doing it? So a lot of the ideas that come out of Agile, are in DevOps. So you'll see things like, test-driven development, like, oh, well, test-driven development. What's that? Okay, well, shift left, shift down, right? You've got lean concepts and Kanban, and of course, massive leveraging of open source, all basically stuff that's been going on for the last 30 years now. So you're likely to run into a bunch of buzzwords while you're talking to people about DevOps. So, let's unbuzz the buzzwords here before we get into this. So what does shift left mean? Shift left basically means get your defect detection going as early as possible, as close to the point of introduction of the defect, so that the defects don't just sit there and get more and more expensive as time goes by, which is what they will do. They don't get cheaper. They get worse. So shift down is let's have fewer defects to begin with. So we're going to use things like root cause analysis, process optimizations, make the process such that fewer defects are being put in anyway. And that way, testing, especially the later testing activities, become more about confidence building and less about defect detection and removal. Now, when you get into the DevOps itself, and people talk about DevOps, it's basically dev is for development, ops is for operations. And the idea is, let's just make sure that everybody's working together. Right? Let's break down silos and let's get people working together and communicating, not just in product management, not just in development, not just in operations, but really across the entire organization. And this includes anybody involved in testing or QA. And generally speaking, there's a lot of automation involved in this. You're trying to get information in front of the right people, the right points in time, so that they know what's going on. So you're basically breaking down silos by sort of, if you will, if I extend the metaphor, cutting holes in the sides of the silos so that you can see into the other people's silos. You can't make them go away completely, which in large organizations you often can't. At the very least, you can get everybody able to see what's going on everywhere else, so there's fewer blind spots. And this allows us to get everything going faster, including releasing. And then DevSecOps is also a very popular variation of this, which basically is just, it's saying something that really shouldn't have to be said, but it unfortunately does, which is security is not an add-on. Security is not an afterthought. Security is not something other people do, but it needs to be part of the whole process. And now, that said, security is an interesting thing because there is a need to know principle in security where you can't just break down the silos such that everybody knows what's going on, because from a security point of view, there are a lot of things like, we'll say the current version of known vulnerabilities that really the fewer people know about them, the better, right? But at the same time, you want to make sure that you've got a wide awareness of it. So DevSecOps is about saying, don't forget about security, and not just application security, but also IT security. So the infrastructure security, the servers, latest patches and so forth. I mean, if you remember I think it was Experian break-in. That wasn't purely a software problem. The thing that left the door open was the failure to apply patches to their web servers, their Tomcat servers. And so their Tomcat servers had vulnerabilities that people exploited to get in. And then the AppSec part kicked in and allowed people to get into the database because, lo and behold, they had forgot to encrypt personal identifying information in the databases. So we want to think about all kinds of security: AppSec, ITSec, physical security, human elements, get that all wound in together. Now, when you're doing that, you start to get into the ability to do things like CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous employment. So CI/CD is, again, about making sure that development, testing are going on same time. Code's being continuously checked in. Code is being built and is being delivered and delivered somewhere, delivered to test environments often. And then to get to the continuous deployment point, that's where you're talking about actually pushing stuff out into production. So this, you got organizations like Spotify and Google and Facebook and so forth that are famous for releasing software many times a day. Basically, the same software that was being written in the morning could very well be in production in the evening. So this is all, what we're talking about when we're talking about DevOps. So where's the intersection with TMMi Levels 4 and 5? How's TMMi Levels 4 and 5 going to help us with this? Well, you look at TMMi Levels 4 and 5, what you see is that testing is looked at in an all-encompassing way. So all aspects of quality, functional and non-functional. Testing is fully integrated into all the lifecycle activities, so it's not, there's none of this throw stuff over the fence and let the QA folks deal with it at the end. And there's also both static and dynamic. So we're not just talking about executing tests at the system level, we're talking about executing tests at all levels: unit integration, system acceptance. We're talking about static code analysis, static analysis of the security of the system, as I was hinting at before, reviews, etc. All of that needs to be thought of as a unified set of activities that are supporting making sure that we're achieving the right levels of quality. We're not just looking at the quality from a point of view of how many tests did we run, how many passed, how many defects do we have, that sort of thing, sort of the level 2 and 3 stuff that you see. You know, you'll see these dashboards. It's like, oh, well, we ran all these tests and, 99% of them passed and 1% failed. And here's how many defects we found. And these are all fixed. And there aren't any SEV 1s anymore. And there are only 3 SEV 2s. And so we can ship. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting. And that's a start, but that's not anywhere near enough. So we want to be able to look at metrics that are going to tell us about how effectively and efficiently the team, the project, and the process are working. So looking sort of under the hood, as it were. And we also want to really look at product quality. And you might say, oh, well, weren't we doing that? We're looking at defects and we're looking at test execution. No, not really, because, you got to think about, well, how adequately did we cover everything? Did we adequately cover everything that we needed to cover? Again, both functionally and non-functionally. So we've got all these metrics that allow us to understand what's really going on from a process, project, and product point of view, and we are now going to optimize. And we're not just going to optimize the testing, we're optimizing the entire life cycle. So testing as part of development, security, operations, all of that's being optimized. And so what we're trying to achieve is, sorry, I got somebody talking in the background. If you're not me right now, could you please mute yourself? Okay, well, let's see. I can fix that. Okay. All right, I just muted everybody who wasn't me who was talking, so sorry about that. If we think about testing processes, these are now fully embedded within the DevOps, or even better yet, DevSecOps processes. They are managed, defined, measured, efficient, and effective. At least that's where we're trying to go. So we're achieving our objectives. We're doing them in a lightweight kind of fashion. We know what's going on. Everybody is on the same page in terms of what's going on. Clear definitions of how the processes work. We can make statistically valid statements about what the test results are telling us, not just, X number of tests and Y number of defects. We are actually able to talk about what those test results mean from a statistical process control point of view. Again, prevention over detection, especially over late detection. Finding bugs prior to release is not what you want to have happening. You want to be, again, your later stages of testing, your later levels of testing, like system and acceptance, those should primarily be confidence building, very little defect detection there. To the extent that you are detecting defects in the later, the higher levels of testing, you're turning around, you're doing this statistical control stuff. You are applying concepts like root cause analysis, Pareto analysis to say, okay, what are the main things that are causing us to miss defects? Lots of automation throughout the entire life cycle. Now, you don't want the tail to wag the dog, of course, so you need to have a good strategy for what you're trying to accomplish with this. There's a lot of bright, shiny object stuff that goes on. Want to avoid that. Want to make sure that you're automating what needs to be automated. and you're paying attention to what other organizations are doing. One of the things that I run into with clients, it's a dysfunction, is the sort of not invented here syndrome. You know, dealing with a client right now that insists on building and maintaining their own ALM tool. And I'm like, really? Are you an ALM company? Do you sell ALM tools? Like, no, we sell tools in, it's another industry. Let me put it that way. Like, well, then why are you doing this? This is not your business. This is not what your developers need to be doing. Not aligned with industry best practices. You're making this stuff up as you go along, and ALM tool is basically embodying what you think you ought to be doing, but that's not consistent with industry best practices. So again, what we want to do here, testing should be fully integrated into development and security and operations. There's testing is out of its silo, or at very least, all of the walls of the silos have strategically cut holes that allow everybody who's in a silo to see everything that's going on in all the other silos. That's often, as I said, in large organizations, the best you can hope that adequate visibility is in place, and done right, that can be enough. So in this presentation, I am going to talk about these process areas and the specific goals associated with them in that sense, that we're not just looking at testing. So you might say, well, isn't this TMMi? And I'm going to say, well, yes, and the T does stand for testing, but at this point, the testing has been fully integrated into all of these other areas. So if you keep, when you get into levels 4 and 5 and you get into trying to leverage TMMi for DevOps, if you keep coming back to the thinking about this as embedded within testing, you're doing it wrong. You need to be thinking about, okay, what does this say about the entire life cycle? All right, so now let's get into some specifics here. We got 6 process areas at levels 4 and 5, contrast to the 10 sort of fundamental process areas at levels 2 and 3. But of course, levels 4 and 5 are building on levels 2 and 3. So we're assuming you got all that stuff in place already. So process area 4.1 is about test measurement. So that process area is about making sure that we have figured out what to measure. We are gathering those measures in a meaningful way, preserving good, precise data collection practices. And then we are applying those measures, say, okay, are we achieving our objectives? That's effectiveness. Are we achieving our objectives in a way that optimizes our uses of resources? That's efficiency, right? And we want to look at effectiveness and efficiency in the context of process. We want to look at in the context of people. We want to look at optimizing product quality, making sure that we are delivering the optimal product quality, which, you know, can be close as possible to perfect if you're, say, making medical devices, or, you know, could be more of just good enough if you're doing something that's not safety critical. So you got to know where that is, right? Also, process improvement. Measurement should be guiding process improvement. Don't just get together and say, yeah, you know, we noticed we have this problem. Maybe we should make that problem go away. Yay, we made the problem go away. Nope. You want to use data to know, did we make the problem go away? Measure what matters, the actual information needs. Don't measure stuff if you don't know why you're measuring it. What is the so what question that you're trying to answer? So you have 2 specific goals defined in this process area: line test measurement and analysis activities. So again, remember when I say test measurement here, to test, think development, security, and operations processes. And do that little mental translation in your mind. And then specific goal 2, provide the results. Okay. So from a DevOps point of view, what do we want to do here? Well, we want to, again, pull the lens back, look at measurement across all these process areas, not just testing, but testing embedded within development, security, and operations, evaluation of quality as a whole. Use proven techniques such as goal question metric to put your metrics in place. Don't just say, yay, I can measure this. Why are you measuring it? Well, you should be measuring it because there's some strategic or tactical objective that you are going to be able to evaluate the effectiveness, efficiency, or the stakeholder satisfaction associated with how you're achieving that objective or not achieving it. And all those metrics need to be used to make the right process improvements, which we're going to come to in the next few process areas. One of those being product quality evaluation. So that's process area 4.2. So we want to have a quantitative understanding of the quality of our products. We want to have specifically defined product quality goals and be able to say we are meeting those or not. So for example, mean time to repair for defects that are found in production. What's your mean time to repair? And that, of course, should be understood in terms of the severity of the impact, right? Again, if you're making medical devices, your MTTR, your mean time to repair a defect that poses a patient safety risk, should be really, really fast, shouldn't it? Whereas your mean time to repair something, a defect that's associated with, use the wrong font on a screen and it's 14 point as opposed to 12 point. No, that's not such a big deal, right? So what are our specific goals here? Well, measurable goals for product quality. So again, things like mean time to repair. Make sure that you have proper priorities for those. So some goals are more important than others. So when you're making decisions about where to focus your resources, where to train your fire effectively, right? You start with the stuff that matters more. And then make sure you're measuring it. You're measuring the progress towards those goals. Now, there are things that keep in mind, right? We're talking about product quality goals. There are things that support those product quality goals, but those things may not be product quality goals in and of themselves, like defect detection effectiveness, for example. That's great. And you would want your defect detection effectiveness, especially for high severity defects, to be very, very high. Don't mistake that for a product quality goal, though, right? That's because that's how you support delivering a high quality product, is through finding the vast majority of defects prior to deliver. Now, MTTR, the mean time to repair, that's a product quality goal, because now we're talking about something that actually happened in production, and how long is it going to take us to get a fix out for that, right? So understand the differentiation there. Now, I'm not saying don't have tactical goals that support your strategic product quality goals. I'm saying understand the difference between them and how the tactical goals support the strategic goals. So from a DevOps point of view, what we're doing here basically is building on the previous process area, the measurement process area. So, as I was saying, focus on, or at least address, product quality and metrics associated with that. Don't just get caught up in metrics that look at process capability, like a defect detection effectiveness. A very good metric, by the way, very important metric, but nonetheless, not something that affects quality and use. Now, make sure that you know what your coverage is, right? So, when I was talking about finding defects and running tests, and I was saying, okay, those are not product quality goals or product quality metrics. Coverage is, right? So you want to make sure that you're looking at things like, for your unit and your integration test, coverage of white box things like statements and branches and interfaces. For your more black box kinds of tests, you want to look at things like requirements coverage, supported configurations coverage, and so forth. A lot of times people just get stuck on the requirements coverage part. It's like, no, it's, you got to think beyond that. There are, at least for any given product that I've ever looked at least 5 to 10 additional dimensions of coverage that need to be addressed. And we're going to talk about evaluating quality. We want to make sure that our testing is looking at all of those different areas. And so make sure that those kinds of metrics are part of your definition of done or your release criteria as well. Don't just say, oh, we measure that. Well, then what do you do with it? Well, we have these slides or we have this information radiator that's posted up in a room somewhere and people look at it. It's like, well, okay, they look at it, right? Example of things that people look at, for some of you may have recognized what's sitting directly behind me here is the entryway to the Louvre Museum, which, is a wonderful place full of things that people go and look at. And they do not use those things in there to do anything. So remember that your software is not a piece of art hanging on a wall in the Louvre. It's something that people need to use to get something done. So the third and final process area at level 4 is advanced reviews. So we were talking about it, important to have reviews early on. Level 2, I believe, is where it's level 3, where we have the first peer review process activity. But in 4.3, so level 4, we're saying, okay, let's not just have peer reviews as like, yeah, there's this thing we do. We look at stuff, we look at code, we look at requirements, we look at user stories, we look at acceptance criteria, we look at given when then statements. Okay, yep. Well, let's do all of that as early as possible. And let's make sure that when we are thinking of static testing, we're also thinking of the dynamic testing. We're thinking of both of them at the same time. That leads us to specific goal 1 there, which is the static test approach and the dynamic test approach are coordinated. So what would that mean? Well, what that would mean, for example, is that we apply a higher degree of rigor to reviewing epics and their associated user stories when that epic or those epics are seen as being high risk in some way. In other words, they have a likelihood of having more problems, or there would be a significant impact associated with problems in those areas. And not only are we being more rigorous about the things that we are more worried about, but we are also taking some measurements out of that through those reviews. So how many defects are we finding in these reviews? What kind of defects are we finding? What does that tell us about what we should be testing later? And when we say something's high risk and therefore a higher degree of rigor needs to be applied in the review of user stories associated with that high risk epic, okay, well, let's talk then about the diminution of risk that came out of that higher degree of rigor, right? It's things like, if you're familiar with failure mode and effect analysis, failure mode and effect analysis is something we're applying upstream during the development process continuously and iteratively throughout the process, try to engineer risk out of the system, right? So as we're reducing the level of risk, and that's going to change our focus. So from a DevOps point of view, I would say don't just think about reviews, but also think about static analysis here too. How do you leverage static code analysis and other forms of static analysis to, again, this is all shift left. This is pure shift left stuff, right? Find defects as close as possible to the point of introduction. We're doing backlog refinement sessions, and of course we should. After a backlog refinement session, and you got to think about what did we learn from that backlog refinement session that should influence the way that we're going to do our dynamic testing subsequently. Think about using static code analysis to do hard and soft limits on check-ins and releasability, right? I mean, I've got clients that say, okay, you can check in a module that has a cyclomatic complexity above 10, but you can't check in a module that has a cyclomatic complexity above 25 unless you've gotten some sort of advanced waiver on that, right? And if we are going to have code getting checked in with higher degrees of complexity, what does that tell us about how we're going to test it? Looking at things like maintainability and vulnerability, right? Limits there. So that's level 4. Now moving on to level 5, now we have the aptly named process area 5.1, defect prevention. Sorry, a little iced coffee there for the throat. So what we want to do is really be looking for, why are we having defects? Why are we still having defects? What can we do to prevent defects from occurring in the future? Now, sometimes people misunderstand this and they think, oh, the corrective action here is just to find the defect earlier. No, you're already supposed to be thinking about that. That's shift left. This is shift down. Okay. The focus here is, how do we stop them from being introduced? How do we stop defects from being introduced? So a specific goal there, determine the common cause of the defect. It's root cause analysis, Pareto principle. Figure out what are the most significant frequent causes of problems, of introduced defects. And then figure out, okay, what are we going to do? What should we do? And this should all be Pareto driven. So you want to target the vital few and leave aside the trivial many. So from a DevOps point of view, yeah, do that root cause analysis. Corrective actions, yes. Preventive actions, yes, both. Shift left with your corrective actions, shift down with your preventive actions. When you're doing retrospectives of various kinds, think about, how did that defect come to be and how do we eliminate it? Not just how do we catch it earlier, that's fine. We're doing that before, but how do we eliminate defects? And as I said, use the Pareto principle. If you're not familiar with the Pareto principle, and you're not familiar with root cause analysis, you're not familiar with things like failure mode and effect analysis, this is stuff you need to look at. You want to really be focusing in on high value improvements, prevention of defects, engineering risk out of your products from the start. Which then brings us to process area 5.2, the quality control. So this is where we start applying our statistical process control concepts that come out of like the Toyota folks, or it's just the root of things like Kanban and Lean. I mean, people like Duran and Deming and Greena that all, transplanted ideas, statistical process control, statistical quality control ideas over into Japan, and the Japanese, doing the thing that the Japanese do very well, took those ideas and polished them and perfected them, right? And so now they come back to us in the United States, and we can say, okay, good, let's take those ideas and let's apply them to software, right? So this is the thing, you got to keep in mind, Kanban was not about building software initially, right? Kanban was about building stuff, building cars. So that same kind of idea, let's take concepts that are all tied up in Kanban, statistical process control, total quality management, and figure out how we can apply those to making our product quality predictable, consistent, and high. Want to make the processes predictable and stable. So, one of the things that you think about Toyota is just this consistency, right? The ability to build the same car of the same level of quality over and over again, right? And also efficiency, right? This is how we went from cars being these exceptionally expensive things to being much cheaper things. So, improve efficiency. So 2 specific goals here: statistically controlled test process, and then performing testing using statistical methods. So this is basically just saying, let's, again, think about testing throughout the entire process, development, security, and operations. Apply statistical process control, Six Sigma, Lean, failure mode and effect analysis, Kanban, to really understand, okay, what is going on here throughout the entire process that affects process capability, product quality, and efficiency. So this is more leveraging of previous process areas. It also involves leveraging of all possible forms of automation across all forms of testing. So now we're getting into that build and delivery pipeline, that CI/CD stuff, and making that visible. Information radiators, so we're able to actually see what's going on in the pipeline. When it breaks, why is it breaking? What's happening? How many failed check-ins did we have, and why did they fail the check-in? Was it because the complexity was too high? Was it too many security issues? What was going on with that? And then we come to process area 5.3, which is called test process optimization in the TMMi framework. But again, I'm going to challenge you to say this is DevSecOps process optimization. This is let's optimize the whole thing. So thinking about the strategic and tactical objectives we were talking about before, thinking about the metrics that we put in place to look at those. What are we going to do? We're going to make them better. Going to continuously make them better, applying the Pareto principle to look for the things that are going to have the biggest bang for the buck first, right? But always continuously getting better and better and better. Again, another Japanese concept coming out of the Japanese application of things like total quality management. It's continuous process improvement. Identify and assimilate new technology. So I coined a acronym earlier this week, YAHINI, Y-A-H, Yanihi, Y-A-N-I-H-I, which is yet another not invented here incident, okay? Meaning another situation that happened because people weren't paying attention to new technologies and best practices that exist outside of the organization. So don't Yanihi yourself. Okay, do not have not invented here incidents in your life, but look for new technologies, outside ideas that you can bring in, and also look for ways of learning from people in your organization that are in different silos. So this is reuse of assets. I ran into a situation with a client earlier this year where you had this group over here, they're doing this great stuff with behavior-driven development, BDD, and they're producing these given when then statements, also called gherkins. And I was like, oh, that's great. Y'all are doing that. So who is the person that you're talking to in your DevOps team that's taking those and converting those into automated tests that become part of your automated test system? And they're like, like, okay, yeah, that would be no one. Okay. And that's a problem that y'all need to solve, right? Reuse of assets across the organization, right? To be smart things get done everywhere. So look at your process improvements, figure out what else is being done out there and how that can be brought in. You know, again, the words testing are used here, but I'm saying, you know, go beyond that. Deploy the test improvements, but again, not just test improvements throughout the life cycle, and reuse. Okay, four goals there are all important. So the other 5 process areas were basically all about teeing up the opportunities for and the ways in which you will implement the improvements to your development, your security, and your operations processes. So this is where the chickens all come home to roost, as the saying goes, but the opposite of that, because that saying, actually, the chickens coming home to roost means all the bad stuff you've been doing coming home and biting you. Now, this is all the good stuff, creating opportunities for optimization. And again, think of my BDD example. There are people in your organization right now, if you're bigger than 2 dudes in a garage or 2 dudettes in a garage, whatever size your organization, if it's big enough where there are people that don't talk to each other regularly, and even sometimes people that do talk to each other regularly, but only socially, there are people doing things that you could benefit from. Who are those people? What are they doing? How do you reuse them? Those are conversations that should happen. Okay, so that gives you some ideas on how levels 4 and 5 are going to, if you look at the process areas, look at the specific goals, really turbocharge DevOps and the associated activities. So you want to get your level 2 and 3 stuff in place, the 10 process areas there that are basically just encapsulated testing best practices. Then move up to 4 and 5. I would encourage you, start with a unified overarching strategy. If the point is to not silo, then don't silo, right? I mean, you've got clients where they were like, oh, you're doing DevOps. Oh yeah, we're doing DevOps. We have this team over here that they're our DevOps team and they're doing all the DevOps stuff. I'm like, who do they talk to? Well, you know, they talk to each other. Like, okay, that's not right. There should be a unified overarching strategy that covers all the development, security, and operations processes. Focus on the process areas and the goals too. The practices that are laid out in the framework can be helpful hints, guides, how to recognize good things that you're doing, but there are means to the end. So, you know, if you get lost in all these details, like, oh, I'm not doing sub practice X.Y.Z correctly. It's like, okay, are you achieving the specific goal that that practice is associated with? Okay. Now, if you're not, then you need to drill down and go, what practices am I not carrying out, right? But focus on the process areas and the goals. Keep your eyes on the prize, as the saying goes. Don't get caught up in all the detail. I understand it's easy to do that when you're first learning TMMi. Of course, there's going to be a lot of trying to wrap your head around the detail. But once you've wrapped your head around the detail, step back and say, well, what is this all telling me? All right, let's see. That's just an advertisement for my company, which we can skip. So we'll go up to the slide here, and I will hand this back to Suresh. But first, I want to do one thing. I was encouraged to do this, give a little pitch for premium members. So if you want to get more involved in the organization, join as a basic member, but even better, premium member, get even more involved with us. And I stopped on the way back from the gym this morning for this webinar, grabbed some Chinese food, and got my fortune, which says knowledge is priceless. Knowledge is priceless, and so is our basic membership, but the premium membership will only cost you $25. So I would encourage you to do that. And with that shameless plug, I will hand it back to Suresh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rex. Rex, we had posted if anyone has any questions, that they can ask, since we have got another 10 minutes, maybe 8 minutes, I can say. So it's time for questions.
Can you see the questions, Suresh?
Yeah, I can see the questions. I'm
okay.
going to ask you the questions. You can answer them. The first one is by Kevin Rush. He has asked, could you please share a story of using one or more of these metrics that informed impactful decisions?
Well, let's see, metrics to impact decisions. I mean, well, defect detection effectiveness is one of my favorite. It is, of course, more of a tactical metric, but it's a very important one to measure how well an organization is doing its testing. And I like to separate out looking at defect detection effectiveness for all defects, and then looking at defect detection effectiveness for the high priority defects. And what you want to see there, of course, is that your defect detection effectiveness for the high priority defects is higher than overall defect detection effectiveness. And then what I like to do with both of those is do a rolling average, depending on the data. Rolling 12-month average is usually a good way to go with this. And, you know, you want the trends to be in the right direction, head it up. And ultimately, you know, it's a good target. I think, you know, the industry average defect detection effectiveness for all defects is 85%. So you want to make sure you're above that. And then, you know, for your high priority defects, you know, kind of depends on your industry. But, you know, if you're in an industry where there are any sort of safety critical kind of implications, for example, then, you know, targeting a defect detection effectiveness for your high priority defects, the ones that have safety critical implications of, say, 97.5 or 98 or 99%, you know, that's a good idea. So that's an example of using a tactical metric to try to kind of point yourself in the right direction from a quality point of view.
Okay, thank you, Rex. And second one is on the DevOps, the TMMi. What one of the person has asked is, have you done any TMMi improvement for DevOps organization, and what are the benefits?
Working on one right now for a client. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're in progress on one, and you know, trying to move them up first, the level 2 and 3 stuff, and then get in position for the levels 4 and 5. Oh, okay. Now what I point out there is that when there's existing DevOps stuff in In flight, what you can see and what we are seeing with this organization is that they're a lot further along than you might suspect. So that even though when we did the first informal rating, they only scored level 1, that was basically because they couldn't get through level 2 and 3, but they had a lot of stuff that is already in place for levels 4 and 5. So it's going to be a lot easier for them than it would be for a typical organization to get to level 5, just based on all the work they've already done.
Okay. Thank you. Gary wants to ask you next question. Gary? I don't know if he's.
Hello,
yeah.
Rex. Thanks for your presentation. So can we then conclude that a TMMi level 4 and 5 can be very less thinkable without at least enough automation to fulfill goals like, for example, statistical optimization or statistical testing and precise collection of metrics across the life cycle?
Impossible, words like impossible are pretty strong words, right? I was before the whole COVID thing broke out, about a year or so before, I went to Egypt and saw the actual pyramids, not the IMP pyramids, right? And you always think about just generally like, wow, how'd they do that? You get up next to them, you're looking at them, and you're like, wow, really? They did that like with no power other than people and animals, right? And similarly down in Mexico City, there's some pyramids outside, and it's like, look at that, you're like, wow, okay, that's some pretty amazing engineering, given that you don't have math basically, and you don't have automation. So impossible is a strong word, but you can imagine how much more difficult, right? So I think this is the same thing, that organizations that don't fully leverage all the commercial and open source automation opportunities that are out there, and they're trying to do this stuff, either roll their own, again, the Yanihi syndrome, or just going, well, we don't need to do that manually. Like I've had somebody telling me recently how they're going to implement traceability using Microsoft Office tools like Excel. I'm like, really? And we're talking about, they've got something on the order of 10 million lines of code. I'm like, okay, yes, that can be done, but that is, I don't want to use a word like stupid, but that's just not the right way to do it, right? So yeah, automation of the whole thing, and not just like automating running the tests, right? But information collection and analysis, etc.
Thanks,
Gary.
Thanks, Rex. Can you go to the next slide, Rex?
You bet.
Skip one more.
You don't want me to make my crack about the knowledge is priceless again?
No, Peter. So just wanted to let you all know, this is continuation with our webinars. Rex gave the information on how to do test process improvement for the DevOps. Often questions were asked to us is, hey, if I have to start test process improvement, what's the foundation, how I can do about it? So for that, we have got solution for you. Our next webinar will be conducted by Mark Summers, and Tom Kegley will be hosting this. In that, we are going to specifically talk about test process improvement using Ideal, which will be beneficial for you if any of you are planning to do test process improvement, how you can start, and it'll have some of the interactive sessions with the examples. Please plan to attend that. We are going to share it in the TMMi social media as well as in website. Register and make use of it. As always, we are looking for more and more people to get benefited through the TMMi, and then how to do more and more of test process improvement. And we'll be looking for more support from you. That I'd also like to say thanks to Rex for this interactive session. It was really wonderful, and I'm sure many people would have got benefited through that. This webinar will be posted in the social media. The recording of this webinar will be posted in the social media, so you can refer to it. And as always, thanks, Rex, for this webinar.
No,
And
thank you.
thanks for all the TMMi America Board of Members, Board of Directors, members, and the attendees. Thank you. So we'll be meeting after this on the premium membership channel. And if any of you are still interested, send your email to info@tmmamerica.org, and we will let you in. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Thanks, Rex.